Good day and welcome to Because Growth Matters, the podcast where we explore the strategies, stories, and differences that drive big results in business and in life. Today, we're diving into the world of sales leadership with one of the most respected voices in our field. I'm thrilled to welcome David Brock to the show.
Thanks, Daniel. It's such a privilege to be here. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. It's such a critical issue.
You know, you've written books, notably Sales Manager Survival Guide. It's described on Goodreads as a book every sales manager should have on their desk. You've founded and you're a partner in companies that drive sales. You've consulted for years. You've added to the industry. Your blog posts are full. You give. You're a thinker, but more importantly, you're a builder of ecosystems. And I really appreciate that. Like, there wasn't a hesitation. Usually in sales, we build pretty big egos. How have you avoided that, Dave?
Well, I mean, if you talk to a few people, a few of my clients and things like that, they may say, I'm demonstrating my ego. But I guess part of it is, for some reason, I'm wired to be just very curious and constantly learning. And what I found in our consulting practice is while we have a lot of experience, and this is the ego coming forward, is we're really smart people, is that our clients are some of the smartest people in the world, and you're dealing with very difficult problems. So, the way we've always approached things is very highly collaborative. And it's not my ego that I know more than you, I have more experience, but we're dealing with very difficult and challenging issues. And how do we together start figuring out how to address them and how to solve them? So I kind of look at the concept of synergy is where we can have 1 + 1 + 1 equal 5. And so that's been kind of the my personal North Star. And it's been kind of our whole organization's how we work with our clients and how we constantly learn and grow together.
If you were introducing yourself and your team to a group of 12 to 15-year-olds, how would you introduce what you do for companies?
I think what we do is help individuals and organizations achieve their dreams and achieve the highest levels of performance possible.
Wow, I like that. That's really good framing. You know, when I tell people that I work in sales, I say I work in the most critical part of the company because companies all exist to sell something. And it's a real privilege to be in sales. But you took a decision quite early on to help sales leaders. What was the catalyst? What was the turning point that said, that's where my niche is going to be? That's where I'm going to spend my energies?
I looked at, our consulting work and things like that, and what I was experiencing in working with literally thousands and thousands of salespeople and leaders all around the world is I saw the tremendous focus and tremendous energy and frankly, huge amounts of dollars being spent on salespeople, whether it was training, whether it was tools, whether it was all these systems and things that could help them. And what I didn't see was the same types of investment with sales leaders. And my own personal experience is probably the most influential people in my own development have been my managers. I was fortunate with, the majority of managers I worked for were very good and very coaching oriented. I had a few turkeys, but they were very, very good and very focused on helping me improve my performance and helping me better achieve my goals. I saw a total absence of this with probably frontline sales managers. And I'd always kind of viewed frontline sales managers as probably the single most important job in selling right now because their job is to maximize the performance of each individual on their team. But they weren't getting trained, they weren't getting coaching themselves, they didn't have the tools to help them do that. So I started spending a lot of time working with sales managers to help them better understand their job and how they can perform at the highest levels possible.
That seems to have shaped your philosophy on sales management. If you had to think of who are the pillars that you leaned on to form it into a cohesive kind of journey for sales managers as you take in the book, who would you say influenced you the most?
I'm not sure that it's anybody, that any single person and all, but I tended to take a lot of things and start integrating them together. I mean, one kind of mentor of mine, we ended up being very, very close friends. We'd lived 2 blocks from each other in New York City and never knew each other in New York City. But after New York City, we met was Mac Hannon. And Mac was famous for consultative selling. And so I learned a lot, and he focused on that kind of sales approach and sales methodology. But he and I started talking a lot about leadership. So Mac was a personal mentor to mine. If I look at, some of my managers, I learned so much from them. So they were personal mentors, and I took lessons from that. Frankly, my wife was one of the best leaders I've ever seen. Watching her coach and develop her team, I took a lot of lessons from her. So it's an aggregate. I don't think there's any one individual, but it's the experiences I've had of people coaching and developing me. It's some great people like Mac Hannon. And I go back to some of the old people, old kind of fundamentals of Peter Drucker and those kinds of things. I look at, modern day people, Patrick Lencioni, and some of the things that he writes about and teaches about is I think are all kind of fundamental things. Jim Collins, while he doesn't directly address that, he talks about leadership issues and those kinds of things. So those are all kinds of areas that I look for to kind of pull ideas and synthesize them and hopefully help my clients.
And you pull a golden thread between them. What do you think are the three kind of attributes or the three tick points that make successful sales leaders in today's world?
I think really understanding what their job is. I'm doing a keynote presentation and I'm talking to a bunch of sales managers and I say, "What's your job?" And they look at me, they say, "Gee, you're an old guy with white hair. You must really be out of it." And they say, "Our job is to make the numbers." And I said, "No, you're wrong with that. Your job isn't to make the numbers. It's your people's job to make the numbers. Your job is to maximize their ability to do this. Whether it's providing them the tools, the training, the processes, the systems, or most importantly, the coaching." So the number one thing is knowing what your job is. I think the number two thing is coaching, I think, is kind of the highest impact thing. So learning what coaching really is, and the coaching word is used for just about everything that we do in selling. We've almost lost the definition, but coaching is really about how do I help people think differently, learn and grow to achieve their maximum potential. We look at different things of directive and non-directive coaching, and too many people say are directive coaches and they say, "Do this and come back and tell me what happened." And that's not something where people learn. And then I think the final element that underlies all of this is really caring about the success of your people, of your team, caring about the success of your peers to really kind of achieve the highest goals. To some degree, we're in kind of a society, and we've seen a lot in business where people have become widgets. One of the biggest concerns I have is we look at things like average tenure in particular in the technology sector is 11 to 18 months in every kind of sales role. And you start saying with that kind of churn and turnover, there's a huge amount of lost opportunity. And when you look at underlying what's causing that, is people don't feel heard, included, and cared for. They're viewed as widgets that can be replaced by somebody else. So you miss your goals this quarter, you're gone. We're going to find somebody else. So I think that fundamental element of caring with coupled with those other two are foundational to any kind of effective leadership.
And you must have seen lots of people making the same mistake. Do you ever just have a duh moment? And I know that's why you wrote your book, but is there just a common error that we make? And I understand what first came to mind when I was planning this is don't ask him if sales managers trying to be the best salespeople is the most common problem, because that's what I see. Our executives expect the sales manager to be handling every big deal and closing all the big deals. So, apart from that, what are the repeated mistakes that led to you writing Sales Manager Survival Guide?
Really, the fundamental thing is people didn't understand what their job is. Understanding kind of the fundamentals of what our job is, and then start understanding the details. So, for instance, there's a huge amount of stuff in our jobs as sales managers. How do we start ordering them? How do we start prioritizing them? How do we start thinking of them? I just saw so many people lacking those basic fundamentals. So that's what kind of guided me in writing the book. And that's what guides me in a lot of the coaching I do of managers and in a lot of our projects is how do we reduce it to fundamentals? The other thing that we're seeing a lot of right now is people are just overwhelmed. They have too much on their plates. And a lot of what I'm spending time with managers and executives right now is what are the top two areas of focus? A few months ago, I have a very, very large European materials company, multi billions of dollars. The sales team is one of the highest performing sales teams I've ever seen, but they still can do better. But what I was starting to see is the managers from the CRO all the way down were just overwhelmed. They were just getting backed up with all sorts of stuff and really not doing the things that were most important. And I said, time out. We've got to have a meeting. And so we got all the top management team, all the regional, the APAC, EMEA, in North America, Latin America, and all those CROs together, sales enablement, rev ops, and a few other people on the management team. And we had a workshop, and excuse my language, the workshop was labeled, Shit, We Have to Stop. And I gave them the assignment. I let me pull this out. I gave them an assignment. I said, go out and buy 3 pads of these. These are Post-it notes. And this one happens to have, I think, about 80 Post-it notes. I said, 3 pads of these. On the first set of pads, write 80 notes on things that are totally within your control that you should stop. On the second pad, things that you're doing that aren't your responsibility. On the third pad, things that you're doing that aren't your responsibility, but you don't know whose responsibility it is. And they said, do we have to fill the whole things out? And I said, yes, yes, yes. And you could tell at one point they started saying, well, it takes me too long to get a cup of coffee. So you know that they've kind of exhausted their memory. But we did that and we just put them on whiteboards and we started looking at things. And it was really revelatory to them just to think and look at all the stuff that they were doing and wasting their time on. And we started kind of grouping them and said, here are things we just have to stop doing to get more focus. So little things of, meetings that we schedule because we've always scheduled them for habit, not just because they accomplish anything, or things that we do that are really wastes of our time. The second category was really revelatory because we found that there had been so much change and so much growth in the organization that roles and responsibilities had become very unclear. And a lot of things are falling through the cracks. The sales managers and the salespeople were picking those up. So it caused us to really go down and start sitting with the other people they worked with in the organization to redefine workflows and roles and responsibilities. In the third category, there were things that had changed that they were doing, but they didn't know who was responsible for those. And in some of those, we started saying, maybe we need to create new organizations and new structures. Maybe we need to redefine things. One of the things we came out of that was it's an old concept, but they never had it was a deal desk. Individual managers and individual salespeople were spending so much time working internally with legal, with engineering, with pricing, and all those sorts of things that they were getting consumed with doing these things, which were critical but detracted them from really doing their job. So this kind of thing of just sitting down and looking at how we can clear the decks and start focusing on what's important. And so I've been kind of long-winded. The most critical issue I see in all of business, but particularly sales and sales leadership, is what are the one or two highest priority things that we need to focus on right now that will have an impact?
That's so easy to say, but I think it's so hard to do unless you've actually understood what your area of impact and where your area of impact comes from. And I think there's gold there, Dave. I really think if people look at their role from a sales manager or a manager or a salesperson perspective, I know we teach that as our first module, is looking at prioritizing your impact because it makes such a big difference. It moves the needle. Dave, if you were speaking to a sales team, so we've got a manager and a couple of sales guys, not as big as this enterprise, how could they re-energize themselves?
I think that there are a couple of things. One is going back to some fundamentals. And particularly in these days where we see, we go to LinkedIn or other kinds of, social feeds and we see all these miracle cures and hints and tricks and things like that.
Follow me for $200 million close within the next year. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So we're distracted by so much of that, and we've lost track of the fundamentals. And the fundamentals have always worked. The way we implement the fundamentals have changed a little bit with changes in markets, changes in technology, and so on. But those fundamentals always work. So, fundamentals of what's our ICP? Where do we focus on? What's our sales process? How do we create value with customers? How do we have collaborative conversations and those kinds of things? So, those are real fundamental kinds of things. That's the number one area. The number two area is really understanding what your focus is and particularly narrowing your focus. Lots of times, I get involved in discussions like our pipeline's a disaster. We need to fill our pipeline. And managers that know me say, one of the first things I ask for when I go and work with a client is they show me your pipeline, and they show me the pipeline. And I said, do you mind if I clean it up? And they say, what do you mean? And I said, well, I see some things that just don't make sense in here. A month ago, 60% of the deals in their pipeline had close dates in 2022, 2023, 2024. And I said, what's happened to those? Are those still active but not been updated? Have you just forgotten to clean things out? So there's just some basic hygiene types things. So you go in and you start cleaning that up. And the simplest thing is when you start cleaning all the crap out of your pipeline, now it frees you up to focus on the really good stuff that's there. And it also enables you to start understanding what the real problem is. When you have all this other stuff in the pipeline and all this other stuff outside that you're dealing with, you're distracted by things that don't necessarily allow you to identify the core problem. And we have, commonly with our clients, we can double their win rates in about 90 days. And one is win rates are so low that it's not hard to double them. But one is just cleaning things out, understanding what the core issue is, and focusing on that and moving forward.
Do you think our C-levels understand the role of sales managers?
6, 7 years ago, I would have said yes. Today, I'd say no, because all the C-level people have been through roles of frontline managers, but they've progressed through them very quickly. I've seen, particularly as you look at kind of the SaaS community and the technology communities, some of these people had their first sales jobs maybe 10 years ago, and they're now CROs of companies. And so they've progressed through, and they've progressed through in a business model that right now is failing miserably, and they don't have an experience base to look at that. So they don't understand their own role as CROs. They don't understand the role of their managers and those sorts of things. As I look into, most of our client base is very, very large organizations, primarily in technology, industrial products, professional services. They've been around for a while. So you see that experience and that seasoning that enables them to understand it. Part of it now is just eliminating a lot of the distractions that we talked about earlier.
So we've now got CROs who are being found out because actually we've been order takers for years, and now we have to be making value for customers, and that's a different environment, isn't it? I mean, the heady years where we needed to sign and just take a 24-month or 36-month SaaS contract is gone now. The competition's big. As sales leaders and sales managers, do you see we doing enough to support these C-level execs who are dealing with this changing environment? Or do you see more excuses being made for why our numbers are falling off a cliff?
I see the rationalization that we have is all these excuses because we don't know how to get past it and start identifying the problems. As we talked about before, the biggest thing I see is all these leaders just overwhelmed and they don't know where to focus because many of them have never been through this before, don't know how to do that. Part of my career was doing turnarounds. And so you walk into organizations, when I started my career in IBM, they recognized that I was a good problem solver. So they put me in charge of organizations that were troubled, and my job was to fix it. And I moved from job to job to job within IBM to do that. And then when I was recruited outside IBM, what I did was basically turnaround. So I had an experience base that said, how do you start doing that? And how do you start sorting through that? Most people don't have that experience base. They don't have people that they can rely on to do this. So they need some help, and all the way up and down the food chain within management, they need help about how to look at things differently. It's not that complicated, but it does require going back to some of the fundamentals. Something as simple as I think our reliance on technology has distracted from our building the skills and understanding because now I go in and people give me marvelous dashboards. There's one interesting person on LinkedIn that says, I've mastered sales management in blah, blah, blah. Here are 21 KPIs that sales managers should measure themselves on. And I thought, oh my God. I've been sales manager in lots of different roles. I've worked with thousands and thousands of sales managers. I can't imagine 21 KPIs.
I can't imagine what else we're going to do. We're going to run the business from behind the spreadsheet. But David, isn't a CRM and amalgamated with AI going to replace the sales manager? Isn't that what LinkedIn's telling us?
Well, that's what it's telling us, but that's not what it's doing. What I see it is people don't understand what the numbers mean. And even if you have an AI augmented performance management dashboards, AI augmented CRMs, and those kinds of things, when I sit down with a manager and they show me these, performance metrics with gauges that go from red, yellow, green, all these performance things, I said, what does that number mean? What caused that number to happen? They don't know how to do that. So it's the ability to say the numbers that we see, the reports that we see are indicators, but we don't really understand performance issues until we get underneath those indicators to say what caused them. People get angry at me because I say, win rates are somewhere around 15 to 19%. And they build their plans around 15 to 90% win rates. And I said, what's causing you to lose 81 out of 100 deals that you qualify? What would it take for you to win 30 of those deals rather than settle for 15 to 19? What would it take for you to win 40? But they never think of that because they're focusing on the numbers and managing to the numbers, not understanding what causes those numbers, what the underlying factors are. Frankly, as I grew up in leadership and sales management, part of my job was to figure things out so I could coach and direct my people to do the things that had the highest impact.
Wow, I love that. I've written, people don't understand what the numbers mean. And you just touched on it there. Fine, we've got a 15% close rate, but what are we losing? How do we stop that loss? How do we qualify better before we even get it into pipeline?
A lot of it is how do we focus on the right opportunities? Part of the win rate is we load our pipelines with garbage, things that we should not be going after that waste our time. Part of it is we sell very poorly. You see all the data that customers don't want to see salespeople until they absolutely have to. So we sell very poorly. So there are all sorts of things that can do this, but until you start looking at and the data to me is wonderful. I kind of treat them as red flags. They tell me there's a problem area here. But, what it does is I have to say what caused these numbers to happen. And again, today's mentality is they don't understand how to do that. They don't understand how to get underneath the numbers. So they manage to the numbers. So they just say, well, the math says if our win rate is 15% and our goals are doubling over the next year, is gee, now rather than winning 15 out of 100 deals, we have to do 200 deals so that we can win 30 of those deals. And so, gee, what that means is we have to do much more outreach. So let's inundate our customers with millions and millions of meaningless emails. Let's do all sorts of meaningless invites and in-mails in LinkedIn and all those sorts of things. So rather than addressing the issue and trying to find out how we solve it, we just reinforce this bad behavior through all the organizations. And you can see now that it's starting to break down. Investors years ago, particularly in technology, it was scale regardless of cost. Today, investors are saying we're introducing the P word. It's called profitability. And people are going crazy. Part of it is saying, well, AI will help us solve that because now we can replace people and that kind of thing, but they still don't understand the fundamentals. AI does as well as you train them to do it. So if you're training them to do a bad job, like send out horrendous emails.
Practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent, doesn't it? Managers, we do have the pressure of the numbers. You've said so yourself. Great managers don't balance people against performance. They know the only way to drive performance is through their people. You've touched on lightly the fact that coaching is probably the biggest lever that we've got. Do you recommend a coaching methodology? Do you recommend a style, or is any self-help book out there on coaching acceptable as long as you're coaching?
There are various different forms of coaching. And some people will advocate, use this form, it's the best in the world, or use this form. And there's no best. I'm one of these things, and even like sales methodologies is, I've been trained in about all the different sales methodologies, and our own company has kind of a sales methodology, but they're all kind of bits and pieces of everything else because there's something you can learn. The key thing when I see most of coaching, it comes down to kind of two categories: directive and non directive coaching. Directive coaching is tell the people what to do. Non directive coaching is how do you engage the people in a conversation where they learn and start figuring things out themselves. And there's some people that advocate you should do all non-directive coaching. And I tend to be biased towards that, but there's some times where you have to do directive coaching. And I use the example of you and I are driving around Centon in a car and you're going 100 kilometers per hour and you're going straight to a wall. I'm going to say, Daniel, step on the brakes. I'm not going to go through and say, Daniel, can you imagine what might happen if we hit the wall? And we're not going through a conversation like this. So there's some times where directive coaching is really important. And so you have to be able to adjust your style to say, this is a situation where the risk is very high, the urgency is very high, maybe the experience level is such that I'm being more helpful by telling. But then as you start going to the non-directive coaching side, what you're trying to do is help people to learn and help people to figure it out themselves. One of the greatest skills that we seem to be training out of people is critical thinking and figuring things out yourself. Every deal is going to be different. Every situation is going to be different. And the ability for the salesperson or for the manager to read the situation and adapt and figure things out is really important. So, if I do the non directive coaching, what I'm trying to do is help people think and figure things out. I'm accomplishing a huge number of things there is one is if I start doing that, say I'm coaching you on a deal, if we start doing things like that, you're going to start applying that thought process, not just to this deal that we're doing the deal review on, but you're going to start doing it in every single deal that you're working on. And see, this is where I get leverage. If I'm strictly focused on non directive coaching, I have to look at every single deal in every person's pipeline and micromanage them on that. And I don't have the time to do that. And my people resent me for doing that. If I go to non directive coaching and help them think and learn and how to do this deal, they're going to apply the same thinking process to every deal they have. So now I don't have to focus on every single deal. I can pick and choose different deals where we can have an impact, but know that the coaching is not just about that deal, but how they approach their whole job.
We are so aligned, Dave. We are so aligned. I love that. Dave, what separates a good manager from a great manager in your mind?
So I'll go back to one of the elements we talked about earlier. I think it is caring about your people and their success.
So GIS, you've got to be curious. You've got to have a little bit of love for them and care.
Yeah, because if you don't care, they recognize that. And they just say, I'm just here to do their bidding. And that's not what fulfills me in a job. I'm going to go someplace else. And also showing that they care and that you're engaged in their success really starts them kind of thinking and reciprocating and behaving very, very differently. Again, what I've seen so much in the last 10, maybe 15 years is we are managing the humanity out of it in making these all mechanistic. It's interesting. I was just before this, I was sitting on this really great program run by Gerhard Geschwantner on AI in sales, and everybody's talking about the human in the middle. And I thought to myself, we've spent 15 years designing the human out of the process. Now with AI, we're talking about how to redesign the human back into the process. It struck me as slightly ironic.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Your average sales manager or sales exec team of 7 to 9 people, how often are we doing structured one-on-one coaching per week or per month in your mind? What would you wish for?
So you need to be coaching your people every week. Generally, things like most of the time I see people focus on pipeline coaching and they do pipeline reviews every single week. But, so many of our clients have very, very long sales cycles. They have 18-month, 2-year sales cycles. So your pipeline isn't going to change a whole bunch every week. So why do we need to do those pipeline reviews every week? So, maybe every 2 weeks, certainly once a month, but we have to adjust the frequency there. I do want to engage my people in a one-on-one every week. I do want to engage my people in one of, maybe it's a deal review, maybe it's a call plan, maybe it's looking at prospecting or something like that. I do want to engage them in at least one of those things every week. So those, when I start looking at the cadences, am I having a one-on-one with every one of my people every week? Am I coaching at least one deal, at least one opportunity, at least one call plan, or any one of those? Am I doing one of those with each person every week? And what you do will shift depending on what's most important to them and what drives their performance. But those are kind of the minimum standards. I say, managers need to dedicate at least 50% of their time to coaching their people every week. Anything less is unacceptable.
Say that louder so that our people at the back can hear that. At least 50% of our time should be dedicated to coaching our people.
Right. And the logic behind that is really simple. If coaching is the highest leverage opportunity we have in driving performance, why wouldn't we want to spend at least 50% of our time doing that to drive performance?
That is such a blind spot that so many leaders have. I mean, coaching is the last meeting to be put in the calendar. It's the first one to be cancelled. It's tracked the least. Every leader like yourself that I interview says, Daniel, coach, structured coaching, question coaching, coaching, yet it's given so little airplay when the numbers are down.
I see so many people doing this. And what I do is I take a very different tact. I say, coaching should be integrated into everything that we're doing. Typically, we do deal reviews as part of our business management process, or we do pipeline reviews as part of our business management process. But while we're looking at the business management process, we need to integrate coaching into what we're doing in those meetings. We don't treat coaching as the separate session that's, as you say, is always canceled because there are other higher priorities, but we integrate coaching into every meeting that we have. And, I've been working with this large systems integrator in Australia for the past 5 years. And part of what we're doing is we're talking about how do we integrate coaching into every conversation we have. So we may be standing in line to get coffee. We may be, driving to a client. We may be just having a casual hallway conversation. How do I integrate ad hoc coaching into every single conversation that I'm having with the person? If we don't treat coaching as something separate and distinct, but if we start integrating it into every meeting that we have, so we may be coaching a team, we may be coaching our peers, we may even be coaching our managers, or integrating it into even the time between the meetings, those ad hoc spaces where we can just, a quick comment here, a quick observation. We can start driving the impact of coaching to a much higher level.
David, that is really good. I really like that. I want to start wrapping up with you, and I was going to ask you one principle that our listeners should apply tomorrow. What's one thing that they could take away that's a free tip for someone that's never going to get to work with David Brock?
I tend to talk about 3, 4 things: curiosity and constant learning, critical thinking and problem solving, collaborative conversations. Those are fundamental skills that apply to every role within a business, every role within sales organizations. So if we can start thinking of how do we improve our own abilities to do that. And so, you think of improving your curiosity skills, and your curiosity skills is you start looking at a person in your organization who's struggling. Your curiosity would drive you to say, what's causing, and I keep using you as the victim in this, what's causing Daniel to struggle so much? Let me find out more about that. The most fundamental skills aren't what we'd classically teach in sales training, but how do we start developing our curiosity, critical thinking, and problem solving? And then the concept of collaborative conversations. Selling is all about connecting with other people. Leadership is about connecting with the people you lead, the people in your organization, and so on. So if we can start mastering those three skills, they take us a long way into, whether we're individual contributors, whether we're frontline sales managers, whether we're CROs, whether we're CEOs, whatever it is, they take us a huge step forward in driving us to achieve what really is possible.
Dave, where do people find you, follow you, and get a hold of your services? Where can we get you?
I post a lot of stuff on LinkedIn, so you can see me in LinkedIn and connect with me on LinkedIn. I publish a blog. It's called partnersinexcellenceblog.com. Reach out, put my email address in the notes for this. It's dabrock at excellenc.com. It looks like the word excellence without the last E.
Awesome. We'll pop that in the show notes. Then my final question for you, what is the 1% that differentiates a sales leader from any other leader in your opinion?
It's around that issue of caring about what we're here to do, what our purpose is in this organization, caring about our people, caring about yourself, and developing yourself to your full potential.
I recommend to all our audience that they grab your book and devour it. And then I recommend that they subscribe to your blog post or get you on LinkedIn, because there's lots and lots of learning. My mic drop moment of today is go back to the fundamentals, understand and narrow your focus, eliminate distractions, and in my parenthesis, I said you will double your impact. Thank you so much, David. Thank you for joining us on Because Growth Matters. I really appreciate your time. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. It's such a privilege. And you asked me questions that nobody else has asked me before. And that's really fascinating. So I really appreciate your thoughtfulness in the questions you're asking.
It's my pleasure. Have a wonderful day. It's a lovely evening here in Johannesburg. I'm going to go and chew over what you've taught me. From us, goodbye. Thanks for listening to this episode of Because Growth Matters. If you found this conversation valuable, I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate this show 5 stars on the platform you're listening from and share it with someone who'd benefit from the conversations. Make sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. See you then.